So the biggest story at the Tony Awards this year was the musical Maybe Happy Ending, okay? This is a robot rom-com set in Korea with a mostly Asian cast. It nabbed 6 Tonys, including Best Actor in a Musical for Darren Criss, who became the first Asian American actor to win that Tony Award. Now here's the thing. Darren Criss is leaving the show next month, and his role has been recast with Andrew Barth Feldman, who's a white man. And so this has caused an uproar in the theater world, and a lot of people are asking whether a white actor should be playing a role that's always been played by Asian actors, even if the character is a robot. Joshua Chong and Glenn Sumi, they're here to guide me through this conversation. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, so Glenn, let's start with you. What was your reaction to Andrew Barth Feldman being cast in the role?
Can I just call it maybe awkward ending? I mean, I'm of mixed minds about this issue. I understand that the creators and the producers, they want the show to expand as widely as possible with no limitations on things like casting. Broadway is a commercial venture. It has to make money. It has to be financially feasible. But what is so disappointing is that after all of that collective joy that, Asian artists, Asian audiences like me, what we felt 2 months ago at the Tony Awards after records were broken, including by Darren Criss, you mentioned that, but Nicole Scherzinger, Francis Yu, who are both Asian artists, they won Tonys in their categories for the first time in 30 years. So what's disappointing is that, now we get this. The show came out of South Korea, ran there for years. It is set in Korea. And to have a show, not continue having an Asian actor in the lead role is just really sad, especially, I think, in this era where, you've got the popularity of shows like Squid Game, you've got K-pop bands selling out stadiums, you've got Simu Liu as a legitimate star. I think this seems like just a really big missed opportunity.
I'm feeling that. I feel that. But Joshua, I mean, talk to me. Like, are you agreeing with Glenn? Like, where are you falling on this conversation?
I understand the frustration, especially from Asian American actors. There is a dearth of roles and opportunities for Asian actors, especially men. But respectfully, I disagree. It's a robot we're talking about here. And I think maybe Happy Ending was held as a watershed moment for the Asian American community. Written by one of the co-writers is Korean, premiered in South Korea, a totally original musical. And it broke barriers, right, for the community. But I don't think the burden of representation should fall on this show. If the role of Oliver was originated by a white actor, right, which it could have been, there would be no debate, I don't think, there wouldn't be the backlash right now. But where is the outrage for the other shows on Broadway that for years, right, have been cast with white actors? Think of Wicked. It took nearly 20 years for the role of Glinda to be played by a woman of color, a Black woman. And that was celebrated. I think that should have been a moment of shame for the production and those casting directors that continually cast white actors in that role. So I don't think the burden of responsibility should fall on maybe Happy Ending. And I think this outrage directed at it could actually jeopardize the show and could close it and could cause so many Asian performers and people working behind the scenes to be out of a job.
Interesting. Okay, well let me like actually bring some context into this. I mean, you mentioned that one of the co-creators is Asian American. I mean, it's Hugh Park, who I believe is South Korean. And some more context. I mean, and you also said that it was like it's set in Korea. It premiered in Korea back in 2016 in Seoul. And at that time, the Chosun Daily, a Korean news outlet, they described this musical success on Broadway, and I'm going to quote here, as a near miraculous feat. So Glenn, like, I mean, why do you think this movie has taken on that narrative where it felt like an underdog? This movie, I called it a movie. Sorry, yeah, this theater show. Yes,
that's your gig, Red. I think it's so rare for an original musical to do well. One that isn't based on existing intellectual property. It's not a jukebox musical. It's not based on a movie or a book, or even a character like Betty Boop, which was the case of a musical that ran on Broadway this season. That character already existed. And if you look at the early days of the show on Broadway, we were just talking before we began broadcasting, but there was talk of it closing even before it opened. But it took word of mouth. It took people to see the show in previews, and then once it had opened, just to become this phenomenon. So, and that is just hardly ever seen, especially on Broadway.
I want to bring audiences into this show, so let's actually listen to a bit of the musical.
Today the air in Seoul is very clear and warm. Today the smiles too are warmer than the norm. Though the change is not profound, there's a specialness going around. Let's enjoy the day.
So that's a bit of maybe happy ending. Now, Joshua, I mean, the two main characters we just heard there, I think, are the helper robots who are sent to live out the rest of their batteries at a robot retirement home. I mean, this is an eccentric premise, right? And we just talked about it as being kind of this underdog narrative. So what is it that made this show such a big hit with audiences?
It was so refreshing after so many years of, these jukebox musicals to get a totally new, original musical. And the score was so special. Jazz influences, hints of Sondheim. And it was refreshing to see a totally new musical succeed and be so successful on Broadway. As Glenn was saying, I was in New York when it was in previews. People thought it was just going to close after a few weeks. There were no big names, maybe Darren Criss, but he's not really an A-lister on Broadway. And for it to succeed was incredible.
And it's like this musical. I mean, if we were to try and like sum it up in like a one word or one line, maybe it's like a rom-com with these philosophical questions about mortality, right?
It's about robots and whether they can fall in love. It's a robot story. Wall-E meets Up meets Once, the musical, but it's a really human story as well about what we do with the rest of our lives.
Okay. Well, I mean, Glenn, let me talk about this backlash again. Now, the backlash to this, to Andrew Barth Feldman's casting, the creators of the musical responded with a middle-of-the-night Instagram post. They said that they wanted their show to be, and I'm quoting here, comfortably performed by anyone, anywhere, yet distinctly set in Korea. What did you make of their statement?
Yeah, I just think it's a little wishy-washy. I mean, in that statement, they said that every role could be played by an Asian performer, but without the intention that the robot roles always would be. And I've heard the example that because I think the robot owner Josh, you can set me right if I'm wrong, but this really likes American jazz music. So really, Oliver could be, like a white American or whatever. But I just think it's really wishy-washy. It's like wanting to have their cake and eat it too. The thing is, I get it. Obviously, they want it to work internationally and on tour. That's how you make money. I was trying to think of a comparison, and I thought of you and Film Rad. So. You know how the original script for Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien, Ripley was supposed to be played by a man.
Right.
Then Sigourney Weaver comes in there. They didn't have to make a lot of changes to the part, but it made history, especially because there were virtually no action roles for women at the time. So what if Alien had been a big success, and then in the sequels, Ripley was changed back to a man? I mean, that's sort of how it feels.
That upsets me already. That's like you knew exactly how to cut right to my core.
Push those buttons.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Joshua, I mean, there's another layer to this, okay, and that's complicating all of this, and that's the lead actress, Helen J. Shen. She's in a relationship with Andrew Barth Feldman, who took on this role. So, what has she said about this?
It's so complicated for her, and she actually posted about this shortly after this controversy erupted. She acknowledged the pain that the Asian community is feeling and understands that a lot of people saw this production as an opportunity for Asian actors, especially male actors who did not have these opportunities previously. But she also said it's complicated because she is in a relationship with Andrew. And she said it's going to be a joy for her to play opposite him 8 times a week for these 9 weeks that he's in the production.
Okay. Well, Glenn, I mean, I want to go back to like, I mean, Andrew, sorry, Joshua, you mentioned like, like a lot of people feeling betrayed, and Glenn, you did too. Glenn, what are some of the notable responses that you've seen from the Asian community?
One of the big ones was the the actor B.D. Wong, who
Hmm.
won that supporting actor in a play Tony. Was the first Asian actor to do that. 30 years ago. He was in M. Butterfly. He said that the casting decision felt like a slap in the face. The Asian American Performers Action Coalition said that the decision, and I'm quoting here, de-emphasizes cultural specificity and the opportunities for a far too often excluded population of actors. I think that Conrad Ricamora was nominated for a Tony this year for playing Abraham Lincoln in
Hmm.
Oh Mary. His response, I think, was really smart. I mean, he's played roles that have been specifically Asian. He was Ninoy Aquino in Here Lies Love, the David Byrne musical from a few years ago about Imelda Marcos. But he was also Seymour in Little Shop of Horrors a few years ago off Broadway, which which is not an Asian role by any stretch. He said that he was in despair after reading all of the responses to the controversy. And so what he did was he started up a scholarship for specifically Asian male actors in theater programs to encourage them to continue. I mean, he of all people knows how difficult it is to succeed as an Asian actor in the industry, and I think through this gesture, and they've raised, I think, in the tens of thousands of dollars now. He wants to make sure that there are more opportunities for actors like him.
I mean, I want to stay on the idea of opportunities for a second. Now, look, like Joshua, like I haven't, a lot of us have not yet seen Maybe Happy Ending. One show I have seen is The Lion King, and I bring that up because that was a show where they did make an effort to make sure that they cast people of certain ethnicities or backgrounds in certain roles. Can you talk about how they went through that?
Yeah, The Lion King, when it premiered in the 90s on Broadway, the creative team and producers made a very conscious decision that for as long as it ran, specific roles should always be played by South Africans.
Hmm.
One example is the role of Rafiki, the manjil. It's a manjil, it's an animal, right? There's no race or ethnicity tied to the specific character. But they believe, specifically Lebo M, one of the musical's composers who is from South Africa, that South African actors would bring a certain authenticity to it, and the character is supposed to be like an elder with this wisdom. So they always wanted to have that opportunity for South African actors to offer them that pipeline to Broadway. So I know every year the creative team goes back to South Africa to hold auditions. And it's a great opportunity and a great way for these South African artists to get their foot into New York. And I think that, that's one way producers can go about it. And I think that's what a lot of Asian community members were hoping that the producers of Maybe Happy Ending would do, reserve this role that is not necessarily supposed to be an Asian character, but reserve it for Asian performers and offer it as an opportunity for them.
Right, because this is the kind of role that could also be that kind of a pipeline to a star-making role on Broadway, right? For an Asian American actor who doesn't necessarily get those opportunities, especially now that it is such like it won all these Tony Awards, so it doesn't need the big name star. It can be an avenue for someone else. Glenn, is that what's adding to the sense of betrayal within the community?
I think so. Yeah, just because, Josh, you mentioned Lion King, there are specific musicals, if we're talking musicals, that do feature, ensembles of Asian actors, I'm talking about Miss Saigon, The King and I, Flower Drum Song, and Pacific Overtures. Neither of those is done very often. And the recent Here Lies Love, which I mentioned. It's funny because A Chorus Line just turned 50, I think a week or a week and a half ago. And one of the amazing things about that was seeing all of the Asian women who had played Connie Wong, who's she's written as as a Chinese American dancer on that line. It's a role created by Bayak Lee, who's since directed many of the revivals in those 50 years. It just made me realize how groundbreaking that was to have a specific role like that. I think the situation here means there's one less of those roles now for actors to step into. I mean, what's been great is that, I'm really dating myself, but in the mid 90s, before I became a theater critic, I was a student and I protested Miss Saigon, the Canadian production of Miss Saigon, which actually opened the Princess of Wales Theater here, had the room for all the helicopter and everything like that. But we were protesting the fact that there were so few roles for Asian artists at that time, and that the Asian women in the show were exclusively sex workers. And this was following the controversy that happened in London and in New York, where, a Caucasian man, Jonathan Pryce, who you'll know from film, he played the engineer, this Eurasian role, and ended up winning all the awards. Things have changed in the 30 plus years since. Things are much better for Asian actors. Asian performers show up in shows that aren't Asian specific, like Mean Girls, Hadestown, Les Mis. There's often an Asian actor as Eponine. Last fall, I saw Ava Noblezada, who is a former Miss Saigon, play the lead role of Daisy in The Great Gatsby. But to have these roles that are Asian specific, I think there are so few of them. Why take one more away?
Oh my God. Well, Joshua, I do want to give the last word to you because you did love this show.
Yep.
Okay. And also I'm sure you, Glenn, and we're all looking forward to seeing when this show comes to Canada, right? But does this casting decision, does it set a precedent for the show when it does travel beyond Broadway?
I think it may. I think new productions and new creative teams, when they're looking to cast this production, specifically the role of Oliver, they'll be much more conscious about the implications of their casting, perhaps more so than the producers on Broadway in this decision. I would like to see other actors play, not just Asian actors, though, because there is an interesting subplot in the show about Oliver and his former owner. His former owner neglects his real-life son and treats the robot Oliver like his own son. It could add some interesting dynamics if Oliver is played by a white man. And this is set in the near future, South Korea. I really don't think it's implausible that a South Korean robot company would make a white robot. And that would add some very interesting subtext and racial implications to the rest of the play. So it's fascinating, and it's a nuanced discussion.
Okay. Well, I mean, look, we got to leave it there, but I mean, you guys have given me so much to think about here. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Rad.
Thank you.
Joshua Chong is an arts critic at the Toronto Star. Glenn Sumi is a freelance arts journalist, also the guy who gave me my very first assignment as a film critic at Now Magazine. So put it on your tombstone. You discovered Rad. If you're in New York, you can. If you're in New York, you can catch the musical Maybe Happy Ending on Broadway.